had well, before that I was a graphic designer. Well, I still am a graphic designer, but exclusively graphic design, and didn't feel comfortable making art to show people. Sometimes I would make stuff on my computer, but it was just, to stay on the computer. Didn't ever get shown. So at that time, for whatever reason, I suddenly got a drive to start making visual art. And I started messing around with a lot of different mediums all at once, real haphazardly. And I came across, at one point, after working for about a year just in every single direction, I came up with the idea of, I used to collect comic books a long time ago, and I got pretty disillusioned by it, or pretty angry about it. It used to be, way back in the day, they'd make these comic books, and they sometimes take care of them, sometimes not. So they became rare, and people started to collect them, and that's kind of cool. But then the comic book industry, found out that people were collecting them, and they started marketing towards that. So they started printing on archival paper, and the cost went way up. And they started like Spider-Man, instead of just being issue 400, they said, well, we're going to start another series of Spider-Man. It's going to be issue 1, and we'll print 100,000 copies and stuff like that. So I'd always been kind of angry about that sort of collectability. So I just came up with this idea that I'd recently seen, I think, another thing like that where it was TV Guide, collect the 3 different covers of TV Guide. And I just thought that was hilarious, because every TV guide's the same except for the cover. And I think the cover is connected too, which kind of shows up later in my ideas. But anyway, I came up with this idea to make 100 matchbooks, or no, actually it was 88 matchbooks. And when you collected all 88 matchbooks, you put them together and it said, collect all 88. And I called it Journey's End, and it was just totally just to be funny, that someone would go through all the effort of collecting all these matchbooks that told them to collect them. And when I put them all together, it was a double row of 88 matchbooks, and I pinned them all up like they were specimens. And I got a lot of good response from it. It was one of the first things I made that got a lot of good response. And I was also making lots of matchbooks, which I was just printing out stickers and buying blank matchbooks and sticking them on, and then handing them out to people. At the same time, I was making digital artwork still, and wishing that I could afford to have it printed. I could never scrape together the money to print things like the beautiful prints Patty has, large prints of digital artwork I made. So one day I came across the idea. I noticed that to get a big print was hundreds of dollars, but to get a 4x6 print was 25 cents. So to get 50 4x6 prints was a quarter of $50, which I can't do the math. So let's say 100, which would be $25. I guess $12.50 is a quarter. But to get them printed in 4x6. So the first couple pieces that I printed out were kind of Hockney style, David Hockney's work. He did kind of a cubist style of photography where he would take, hundreds of pictures of one scene and then put all those small pictures together. So I did that, but with something that was very controlled. So you couldn't tell right away that it was a bunch of different photographs. You thought it was just one big one, but then you got up close and you saw the lines of the separate prints. I wasn't totally happy with the effect. I thought it was kind of contrived. Then one of my books. At the same time, I happened to be working with a friend of mine on a piece that involved Jello. I was putting down clear matte medium through a silk screen and then sprinkling Jello powder on it, so the Jello powder would stick to the clear medium. It was kind of like using Jello as a color, or just the Jello powder. And the images were of horse heads, which is what Jello is made of. I thought it would be really cool to buy, 80 Jello boxes and make a mosaic out of them. So that was the first piece that was the birth of that body of work, which I call Enough is as Good as a Feast. That line is taken from Mary Poppins. the reason I took it from Mary Poppins, or the reason I was watching Mary Poppins, kids, was that a lot of the pieces in Enough is Good as a Feast were from musicals. So it started out with Enough is as Good as a Feast. I did the Jello box piece, and it had a photograph of bologna, like in the supermarket, in the bin. Kind of, I can't really describe it, but it was bologna on Jello boxes. And the reason to put those two things together was that they're very similar, but you wouldn't expect them to be, because Jello is derived from gelatin, which is meat, or boiled down or rendered horse hides and stuff like that. And then the bologna is pretty obviously meat, but then it's all mixed up, whatever meat. So I really liked it, and I got a good response from the then director at the Aspen Art Museum. And so I felt like really confident that, okay, now I've found something I enjoy doing, and people are responding to the aesthetic and the idea. So I really started attacking it whole hog. I started making things. Not long after that was the first piece that involved a musical, and that was, I call it Wholesome Goodness, and it was a bunch of Pepsi cans. Not like there's a piece that has Coke cans where I covered the Coke can tops with buttons, like are on these pieces here. These are all, by the way, the circles are, badge mount is basically a pin back button. So you can buy these presses that will allow you to make your own pin back button. You know, just slogans on them or whatever. But at that time, I hadn't thought of using buttons yet, so it was just the Coke cans, or the Pepsi cans stacked up in a perfectly symmetrical, or a perfect rectangle, with just the pictures sitting on top. And the pictures were still flat. They were just glued to the very fore edge of the can. And so the cans would curve behind it. And it created a really weird effect as you walked by, that the background, was staying, or that the cans were staying in the background, and the foreground just kind of shifts like one of those lenticular images. And that was a picture of Annette Funicello. So that was from Beach Blanket Bingo, which that's just the first musical. I came up with the idea of, for some reason, Busby Berkeley musicals, because they were so outrageous. Busby Berkeley had the reputation of going way over the top with his musicals, like thousands of people in his cast, and did those, like the $1 Million Mermaid, I think is one of the famous ones, where it's got all those women swimming around. And actually, the picture on Purified in the back is from $1 Million Mermaid. But so I wanted to go find Busby Berkeley's not on DVD, so I Beach and I got Annette Funicello, and I just started making pieces like that. And through the next spring, I made quite a few that were, I didn't focus on the musical aspect of it so much yet. Sometimes I would put pictures of, when I had, for a large ramen noodle piece that was actually showed here at my last show, it had, hundreds of packages of ramen noodles. So before I covered it up with pictures, I would photograph it. And the same thing, well, actually the picture that was on the ramen noodles was a bunch of open cans of SpaghettiOs. And I had a bunch of open cans of SpaghettiOs on my counter because I was emptying them out to use them in another piece. I did kind of enjoy doing things like that where one piece would link to the next. I would empty a bunch of packages, take a photograph of those packages, and then use that photograph on the next piece, perhaps. But then I started really focusing on photographing musicals off of my television screen. And I'd really get into capturing some motion from them, using the classical composition that's often in those kinds of films, really saturating the colors, and using lots of different products, trying to figure out, I really enjoy coming up with shapes. Like if you put a bunch of cans together, it kind of forms a honeycomb shape. If you put them together one way, put them together in other shapes for other things. Putting boxes together in odd shapes. And I also really enjoyed through all of them that it was a way of outputting a digital file, you know, that wasn't just a flat output. Because so often, you know, you can make something really cool on a computer, print it out. Like, oh, excuse me, my mouth is dry. So, I enjoyed making something that people couldn't immediately figure out. I think it really disarmed them and would make them a little more open to wanting to find out what was behind the artwork. I think that's the way I really, excuse me, like to pursue an aesthetic, is making something that's beautiful but also confusing. So I kind of got burnt out making those pieces for a while, you know, because it was like the one thing I could do, and people were like, oh, it's another one of those are really cool. So I wondered if I could do something else. And early on, when I was experimenting with a lot of different things, before I hit on the consumer goods angle, I had thought of outputting onto iron-on paper from my inkjet printer. And at the time, though, you know, iron-on paper, it's just this paper that's got a plastic film on one side, and the other side's like waxy and heat-resistant, and you print it out backwards and put it face down on a surface which is supposed to be cloth. That's the only thing they're supposed to go onto. And then you iron it on and wait for it to cool, and hopefully it'll peel off well. They don't always. The first piece that I did like that was actually quite a bit like these plates. It was of a kid named Mason, son of somebody, I can't remember who his parents are. But it was from, these are from Walmart ads. And in Walmart ads like this, they use their friends and family for their models, or they did for a long time. And they don't want to put their last names, they want to protect their identity somewhat, even though they're reprinting their face thousands, millions of times. So they always just put their first name and who they're related to in the Walmart family. And in that piece, though, instead of having Mason showing, I ironed it onto a small canvas in 4 sections, like 8 by 10 sections, and then painted him out. So he's just a white shape. And I always really kind of liked that, but I never really pursued it any further because I was working on this other body of work. So I was like not knowing what to make. And I just bought this sketchbook solely because it was a sketchbook that was made out of an old Babar children's book. Like they cut out the middle and put in white pages. And I don't like to sketch, but I like the sketchbook. So I started doing iron-ons into that. And it was just photographs that I was taking walking around Glenwood Springs, which is where I'm from. Into photography, so I was always, you know, trying to find whatever urban elements there were, even though that's a pretty small town, there's not many urban parts to it. So the most interesting thing that I could find around there usually was the train cars, because they were coming in from other places with graffiti on them. And they sit out in the weather for 30 years and really get worn down. So I started taking lots of pictures of those, and every day I would print them into this sketchbook. And I did that for about 4 or 5 months, and then I actually finally did make a body of work from those iron-ons. But partway through doing that, partway through that body of work, I should say, like 4 months after learning how to do those iron-ons, suddenly I became aware that the city had approved for Target to move into our town. Target and Lowe's and a bunch of other big box unnamed businesses. And it was right by my house. And to be honest, I hadn't known about it because I don't keep so much in touch with what's going on in my community sometimes. But the Target was approved, and I got invited to be a part of this show for this organization called the Aspen Valley Land Trust in Target. So I want to do that. I didn't have much time to get ready for it because I just found out about it, and most of the artists were just going to do like paintings that they'd done in that meadow at some point during its existence. But what I did was I went out and photographed, actually Do you mind if I ran and grabbed that piece real quick? Be right back.
Jeff, come on.
Sorry. Hope you're not bored yet. Okay, so this was the piece that the first piece I made for it. And I just went out, and this is the meadow that they had ripped up not long before, and then that's just the mountain, covered with snow. And up here I put this model who was exercising, and whenever models are exercising in Target ads, they look very serious. I really liked how serious she looked. And then I also overlaid a page which always has the food items, just very faintly. And this part right here is a technique that I figured out in my sketchbook. Those are transparencies, which are meant for like business presentations where they print out a transparency and project it up onto a screen. So I was doing that in the book because at the time the way I was doing iron-ons was the correct way, which was to leave the paper on the back. And frequently it wouldn't transfer the paper very well. They'd come out very washed out. So I would cover them with the same image again on transparency, and they'd get really rich and dark. But on this one, I had kind of a breakthrough because of a screw up. Because you have to, in order to get the image on there so that the text will read correctly, you have to print it all backwards, and I didn't. So I printed this whole thing the wrong way. And that's, I was like, going, oh my God, I can't afford more ink. When I suddenly thought, I remembered how sometimes when they go through the printer, they'll like catch on something and get a little peeled apart beforehand. And I thought, well, I wonder if I can peel them apart. I could. You could peel them all apart. So I could put them down whichever way I wanted. And all you have to do is put something between the plastic and the iron to keep it from melting to the iron. So you just put parchment paper. I eventually figured out this secret stuff they were selling because there's another kind of transfer that actually that's the process. So that helped me think of that too. And they put this paper in there, and they actually say that it's like this super secret paper, but it's just parchment. So I eventually figured out that it was parchment paper, but it was a real relief and a really cool discovery because it just made it so much more workable. It made it a much more viable technique. So I made that one and another one quite a bit similar that had a slogan as well. And that slogan is actually taken, it's even got the logo, scanned from Target. And I don't know what it is about that slogan, but I really find it funny and disturbing somehow. Run in before you, and in the context of the meadow had just disappeared, and the whole landscape was like all this up in here, all this area is going to become houses or low-income housing, supposedly. And so I kind of thought it related to that well. And it's one of those, I don't know what it is about Target ads or those kind of advertisements, but I look at them and I can't imagine how people can not find them just horrifying or hilarious or just like completely wrong. But something's gone wrong in my head that I always read them in the wrong way. So after I did that, I didn't actually make much work for, got involved in some other real life things, but then got asked to do a show at a small art store in Glenwood Springs. And I based it off of this piece and the other piece like it. And I made one more large piece, and I made that are on the opposite wall. I made a larger set of those, some of them are gone now. But the plates I made by doing iron-on into the base of the plate and then pouring resin on top of that. Because the iron-on never really goes onto a surface like a curved surface like the plate. The iron can never really meet those curves. So I put the resin on there to make it seem more like a complete surface. And I really liked this piece and the other one like it, but the third piece that I made for that show, I didn't feel how these pieces are just kind of, I didn't think it quite made sense. It didn't seem complete somehow. So I tried doing 2 layers of the iron-ons and then just glossing that layer. And it was a little better, but I still wasn't totally happy with it. So I kind of stopped after that point, not knowing how to keep making those pieces. But last fall, when Ivar approached me about a show, I had come up with the idea in the interim because I had taken that photograph. And I had used the buttons. The idea for those came from reading an article in the Onion show newspaper. The article was about kids in a class who had subverted their teacher's button-making machine into making rude slogans. And I just thought that was so cool. It's like, man, I wish I'd done that with my teacher's button maker. I just had to get a button maker right away. So that's when I started making those. And I really like the buttons for a number of different reasons. First, I just like their shape. They're not easy to figure out what they are in the context I use them. And I also like that you know, when you go and buy buttons at a record store or someplace like that, they're kind of this manufactured individuality. Like the woman in Office Space, I don't know if you guys have seen that, who has all the flair. Yeah, yeah, it's like this thing that, I mean, you go out and you buy this button, it's got this cool slogan that someone else came up with, and they've manufactured thousands of those buttons. But it's like to express your individuality. And I really like their shape. I think that shape, when I was using it in these pieces, I was thinking a lot about how those circles seem to be really big, like moving circles in shopping ads, like advertisements on TV, like move all over the place and expand and contract with images inside of them. And I kind of think of them as, you know, like they've been caught in the instance that they all explode out from a central point, like they're brightening the image that's in the background, which is a lot of the time it's like a destroyed landscape or a changed landscape, and it's like making them, you know, look good to the people. Like, this is good what we've done to this landscape. And I always put them focused on an object that's in the foreground that's from the shopping. And I like to find that the images that I choose for that, it's usually something that, like these belts, I was just attracted to, you know, they're such a mundane thing, but they put them in such a bizarre shape. I did a sketch of that on paper beforehand, which a friend of mine bought, and she couldn't figure out that they were belts at first. She thought it was some kind of claw digging up the dirt. And these blenders, they're all blenders, but they're all different kinds of blenders, if that's possible. Like this one's for blending smoothies. It's better at blending smoothies than this other one. And the sink, that's actually from a Lowe's ad. And the thing I like about the Lowe's ads is they always have this little phrase that with a pointer saying, in this case, convenient single handle design for easy operation. It's much easier than those two-handled ones. It's such a strange shape that it's taken out. I mean, kind of War of the Worlds, like the spaceship floating over and coming to kill us. It's always funny to me, the things I'm making. I don't know if people always find them funny. I like the thought of someone coming with their fancy new cell phone, and I'm totally guilty of being attracted to fancy cell phone abilities. I've spent all kinds of time shopping for one that played MP3s and took pictures and all that stuff, which I never use. But people like going up somewhere and using their cell phone to take a picture of this landscape. I just like the idea. I'm not sure what else to say. think I might be done.
Well, you know, this piece just really has resonated, I think, with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And to me, I always look at it and go, well, the landscape looks fantastic, and then you try to take a picture of it, and it's just like this, you know, just never works out.
Yeah.
So that's,
I remember at the opening too, there was someone taking a picture of it with their something.
These, and they're the ones I'm actually most curious about.
Oh, I'm sorry. That one, I should say something about that. The background of that one is actually taken from that third piece I made for the show, the small show that I told everyone about. There's a whole landscape up above that I use in the other piece. But then I was looking at it one day, I wasn't totally happy with it, and I was like, that's the best part of that piece. It'd be really cool to use just that background in something, or just the parking lot part. And then using the models, like I used this model here, and I think I really love that, but I was never very comfortable with stealing someone's face like that. I don't like taking someone's face and putting it in my artwork without permission, first of all, and even with their permission, it would be kind of weird to me. So I actually did things like this first, where I blurred with the digital mosaic effect, like they do on cops. I did it like that, and I was really, you can't tell so much with this plate, but when I did the sketch on paper, you'd stand away from Brandy and her face would come into focus again, like if you were back over there. So I really liked that. So I was wanting to put, I decided that I was going to use those models originally in the sky behind the sink, but it didn't work out the way I thought it would. So I just had them all separate out and ready to go. And I put that center one on the background and blurred her way out. And I was like, oh yeah, that's it. It just really worked. And I put the buttons on top of it.
Who are they?
Thought, they're just bra models from Target. They were stacked on top of each other on the margin of the page.
It's funny because they like run minimalism in a way. They
Yeah.
sometimes specialize in illustrative painting as they do photography.
I hadn't thought about that. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Any other questions?
What I like about them is that makes it so interesting is they blur the line between digital art, painting, photography, all that. You have to really sit there and think about, is this painting? Is like,
Yeah.
and it's work that really rewards you for spending some time with it. The first time I looked at it, I'll admit I was like running around chatting with people, blah, blah, blah. It was the opening. But coming in here early tonight, I really got to spend like 20 minutes just looking at the show, at just your stuff, and really feeling what you were trying to say. And I think that's interesting. And I like work that really gives you the opportunity to go back numerous times, see more things in it, see more ideas in it. And hearing you talk about it has been like another level of that.
Oh, is it something? But yeah, I actually enjoy that quite a bit when people, like, there's sometimes I can try and explain to people again and again what I've done, and they'll still call it a painting. And when I did a show of the train photographs, what I would do is take close-ups of the graffiti on train cars, so it just was kind of an abstract composition at the time. And it was just the iron-ons with the gloss coating on it. And people, half the time, like, they just thought they were paintings from the get-go, and they never were convinced otherwise. I couldn't figure out how they could think that. I was glad they did.
That's kind of in line with what you're talking about in your work too. The idea of selling an idea, and it's a visual idea as opposed to the actual reality. Like, you must have it because it looks like a painting.
Yeah.
Like, even when you can go to Target, you can buy these paintings or photographs, and it's like $20, and there's like 30 of them in a row. So it's nice that you can actually, like, in a like kind of subversive way, turn people's like consumerist like expectations back on themselves with your art.
Yeah.
Being a straight photographer, you'd be best served for people to think you're a painter anyway.
Yeah, well, that's something that's unfortunate with artwork a lot of the time. This is an opinion that I've formed after making bizarre stuff that people look at for a while, is that you score a lot of points for them not knowing what it is right off the bat. I think there's a switch that's flipped in the brains of humans when they see a painting or when they see a photograph. Like, as soon as they see a frame around something that's pretty photographic, they're like, it's a picture. And I don't know, it's just like they don't immediately think about it unless either they came there to think about it, or they're like forced to sit there and don't have anything else to look at for a while. Same thing with paintings. All too often, they'll just be like, oh, that's a really amazing painting. They just.
There's an article in the New York Times, I think a couple of days ago, that talks about how people think that if it's a photograph, it was like that. It didn't take any work. But if it's painting, they have to revere it because it took a lot of effort to make.
Yeah.
So the more effort, the more art-like it becomes.
Yeah. That's a thing that photography suffered a long time.
The thing about most photographers, they'll take 20 photos and maybe one of them's good.
Yeah.
And
100 might.
sit down, an hour or 2 hours, like whip something out, and it may look fantastic. But
Yeah.
it's so immediately expressive that they act. It's
I think photography even has more viability than digital art right now. I don't know. I don't have like any statistical evidence. I think when you tell people that you did it with a computer, they have this image in their head. Oh, you hit the make it look good button.
That's true. Very much so.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, you have a computer program that does that for you. Well,
Yeah.
all you do is, you don't need any talent or forethought, just you push the button and the computer does it all.
Yeah, they're like, oh, my nephew does that.
Yeah. So I have an odd observation kind of question, not really question, I don't know. These seem to be very much about the environment to me, and even your earlier work with the Coke cans and, consumerism and environment are so inextricably linked. There's not anything you can do. But something that's interesting is that you've got this grid showing through in all the works. And someone once told me that, I think Bruce Price actually told me that the grid was all about the built environment, all about the urban and the human structure over the top of things, which seems to really fit your work. Didn't really fit mine, so it kind of set me off in a new direction. But it's like this underlying, very subtle thing that's going on, and then you've got like the round versus the hard edge, And when I first saw these, I was like, yeah, I really hate seeing that grid. I hate seeing how it's done. And the more time I spent with it, the more I looked at it, the more I felt like it was just so appropriate and so correct. And also the idea of pixelation. And there's so many different metaphors that come into seeing that line, So I guess that really wasn't a question.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, the grid is always something I enjoy. I know it's becoming kind of trite in some circles because so many artists are.
Those are painting circles.
Actually, with photography too, there's people who do, processes that are kind of limited to size, and they'll do a big grid, so they can do exactly what I'm doing. But I still like them. And grids have always been something that, from the very beginning, I've always been breaking stuff up into little squares. And I think with painting too, most painters will break stuff up into a grid before they start painting.
Well, you mentioned the mosaic as well. Go ahead.
I'm actually attracted to the grid on the pieces because you're dealing with nature and then manufactured goods, and I think that kind of creates a bridge between the two. Otherwise, it could be just kind of superimposed where there's a definite separation. So for me, it kind of it makes it a little more. It flows a little better.
Yeah, I was just saying that mosaic that you were doing with this and the other one that you mentioned, and it's the way that they look mosaic from here on that one in particular, and all of them really, and with the circle mosaic on it. It's really making me think of the old, beautiful like mosques and where there's a lot of mosaic work.
Harder to make.
I love that reference to history though. It's really because of
That is,
with the juxtaposition of how contemporary, especially that one, is. I really love that push-pull of the then and now about it. Yeah.
Thanks. So I also, with the grids, I've always, or with the buttons, I have often thought of them as a reference to the, when I was going out and buying lots of packages of things, when you go to the store, you buy two cans of soup, or however many for your family. It's not that much. But when I was going, I was buying 300 packages of ramen noodles, and seeing that, and also realizing it only cost $30. Like, just you start to see the vast numbers of the things that we make and how fast they move through our lives. So I like breaking things up into smaller and smaller bits, just to sort of show all the little pieces that go into the makeup of our society that just get overlooked, I guess. Yeah?
This is more of a comment than a question, but there was recently a show at John Beckman Gallery in New York of photographs, because you were talking about like the built environment, the digital photography and stuff. There were photographs actually printed of images that were built in the video game Second Life. Second Life? Is that what it's called? Yeah. And I would recommend looking at it just because I think you could maybe find some rich material there, because there's people building digital copies of things they know in real life.
Oh, cool.
And creating these worlds that they know, but it's all completely bits of data and information and pixels on the screen, and then they print them out and they put them in a gallery, and it's really a digital picture. They push the easy button.
The easy button was going to come up.
Yeah, I have an Xbox game, World Series of Poker, and it has a function in there where you can go in and make your player look like you with basically the same technology I think the police have. And I got a pretty fun version of me playing poker. I thought it might be kind of fun to try and make a bunch of friends in my poker game and do something with it.
I've been really interested in that whole idea lately, though, just like of people building avatars for themselves to exist in the online world, and then like it really makes you question, like, how do you know somebody? Do you know them from, like, when you're emailing a stranger back and forth, you get this picture in your head of what they look like.
Oh, yeah.
And you're always wrong. You're always, like, so far off base, usually even, like, gender. But with that avatar, it's like you get the version of themselves that they think they are.
Yeah.
To add to the version that you think they are. And then it just gets so complicated if you meet them in real life. Like, how do you know that person then? Like, who are they to you? I'm so confused by this.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty interesting, because those online communities are just getting bigger and bigger all the time. The games that are being played. Anything else?
Any other questions?